Today, we all think of John Carpenter as one of the 20th century's undisputed masters of horror, so it's easy to forget how much of his career was in fact defined by arguable failure. After the late 70s and early 80s success of Assault on Precinct 13, The Fog, Escape from New York, and, of course, the gigantic game-changer that was Halloween, it was probably tempting at the time to assume Carpenter's career would continue in similar fashion. But it's important to remember that, while today widely considered one of the greatest horror films of all time, 1982's The Thing was both a financial and critical disappointment upon its release. 1983's Christine and 1984's Starman were both moderately successful enough to provide a brief respite, but 1986's Big Trouble in Little China confounded both critics and audiences alike, and also failed at the box office. Carpenter would close out the 80s with two films, Prince of Darkness and They Live, that only managed to be considered hits thanks to their very low budgets. But it was the 90s when Carpenter would especially struggle, releasing 5 films, all of which failed at the box office, even 1996's Escape from L.A., a sequel to his iconic 81 hit Escape from New York, which was clearly meant to reverse course on his recent bad luck and restore that old Carpenter magic, but was met with apathy from critics and audiences alike. The studios continued to trust Carpenter with projects, apparently testament to both how significant his early successes were and, most likely, the benefits of being an already established white male director. But even then, there is eventually a breaking point, and that seems to have come with 2001's Ghosts of Mars, Carpenter's sci-fi horror western about a squad of police officers teaming with a dangerous criminal to battle the possessed occupants of a mining colony on a terraformed Mars. The project had a rough road to the screen. Carpenter wanted Michelle Yeoh, Famke Janssen, or Franca Potente to play the lead officer, but when they turned it down, he instead cast Courtney Love, only to see her suddenly leave the project, forcing a last-minute recasting to Natasha Henstridge, who had a good time making the movie, but nonetheless forced production to shut down for a week after she fell ill as a result of exhaustion from hurriedly joining the shoot immediately after finishing 2 other films. Meanwhile, while Carpenter had wanted rising star Jason Statham to play the film's show-stealing role of convict-turned-antihero Desolation Williams, producers decided the movie needed more star power and forced Carpenter to instead cast Ice Cube, demoting Statham to a smaller supporting role. Ultimately, Ice Cube's perceived star power meant little. Despite Carpenter's later insistence he had purposely made a silly movie that was not meant to be taken seriously, audiences and critics found the film to be too schlocky. Several critics named it one of the worst films of the year, and like so many of Carpenter's previous projects, it too failed to make a dent at the box office. Unlike those others, though, this one really seemed to either take the wind out from under Carpenter's sails, or perhaps cause Hollywood to finally ask whether his name recognition was still worth the money they were sinking into his projects. Ghosts of Mars would be Carpenter's final big studio movie, and his last directorial effort for 9 years. He would only make a brief return in 2010 with the largely ignored and today barely remembered indie horror, The Ward. While Carpenter has remained a prolific musician, comic book creator, and general genre media presence, he has not directed since. But his career stands as a reminder of why one shouldn't view a project as entirely summed up by initial reception or financial performance. Today, much of Carpenter's less successful efforts have been reconsidered and reclaimed by critics and fans. Even Ghosts of Mars has found a small cult following more attuned to its goofy tone. And if Carpenter's legacy proves the benefits of hindsight and perseverance on an artistic level, films like Ghosts of Mars might potentially prove the importance of never forgetting a good idea. Because one thing often lost in discussion of Ghosts of Mars is that it wasn't even the first sci-fi action film involving Mars and heroes battling possessed humans that Carpenter was ever attached to. In the mid-90s, Carpenter was briefly attached to another project with some very similar story elements. While that project didn't happen, the movie was eventually made in 2008. And maybe both Carpenter and his fans can take comfort in the knowledge that, based on the resultant reception to the film when it did happen, it's possible that even if Carpenter had made it back in the mid-90s, it wouldn't have fared any better than the rest of his unfortunate 90s failures. The year is 2008, and entertainment film distributors in the UK and Magnet Releasing in the US are ready to release an independently made adaptation of a popular role-playing game, and in the process hopefully launch the next big sci-fi action franchise with Mutant Chronicles.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, here to talk all things Chronicles, whether that's Narnia, Spiderwick, Sarah Connor, Riddick, Young Indiana Jones, Christmas, Xenoblade, or just plain Mutant.
Yeah, although a lot of those, most of those actually, got franchises going. So we won't have to worry about most of those. If you could pick the one out of there that you've never heard of,
I know.
Guess what? That's the one we have to talk about.
I know. I tried to find more, and they were all fairly successful. I had to even go to a video game. Xenoblade is a video game, so there you go. Yeah.
Well, this has apparently been a video game too, and we'll talk about that. But look, this is a really special one for us, Chris, because sometimes I like when we do movies that really go the extra mile, and that's why I'm excited that for this episode we're doing a movie that has not one, not two, but three characters sacrifice themselves with hand grenades. That's when you're dealing with a special one, and so this is the continuation of our January theme, the Mutant GENEuary. And that is looking at, oddly enough, not an X-Men related movie. We did New Mutants last time, but we're looking at a different kind of mutant this time with 2008's The Mutant Chronicles, or just Mutant Chronicles, I guess. I don't know why I threw the article in. But Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this 2008 British-American production?
Sure. It is directed by Simon Hunter. This is kind of his big break into Hollywood, but he did nothing of note before and nothing of note after. So
I don't know if you big break. I don't know if you can use. Are we legally allowed to say that? Or?
I just want to. I got to give him some wins up the top. Okay, so
sure. He's probably listening. So yeah.
Well, he's in between breaks at the supermarket or. Mm-hmm. Does that mean? We don't like making fun of actors, but
directors are fair game.
They're fair game. They're fair game. Okay. Yep, I just want to make sure I'm within the rules and the scope of our podcast here. Okay. Yep. The Mutant Chronicles is written by Philip Eisner. He wrote the schlocky sci-fi horror movie Event Horizon. The budget of Mutant Chronicles is $25 million domestically, Trev. I have to give a couple caveats here. So before I tell you the domestic numbers, this is, like Trev said, a British-American production. So this movie was released in Europe in 2008, followed by a North American VOD release in March of 2009, with a small selected cities theatrical release in April of 2009. So this movie made $6,800.
Mm-hmm. Domestically.
Yeah, domestically. Yeah. And worldwide.
No, I'm sure the worldwide saved it though, right? So that's
it definitely did not. A catastrophic $2.1 million.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we get asked, why did you pick Mutant Chronicles to talk about? Well, this was just a complete, as I said, catastrophic implosion of some would say creativity and business.
And this was a movie that, whatever their franchise plans were, they were clearly looking at this as a franchise, as we'll talk about, because it is based on a pre-existing IP, a popular franchise already. So we'll have to talk about that. This is not an original idea. This was an adaptation of a sort.
Mm-hmm. Hey, before we go any further, I wanted to jump in and say this is a Thomas Jane vehicle. So he's the main character of this, right? This is 2 years in a row. I don't know if you know this or if you thought about this. This is 2 years in a row that in January, the beginning of the year, we discuss Thomas Jane flop.
Well, shit, we got to keep it going now, right?
We got to keep it going. We got to keep it going.
Yeah. Okay.
and you know what?
Thomas GENEuary.
We're doing it. We're doing it.
Yep. Thank you.
You know what? And honestly, I'm sure it applies. Oh, okay. Anyway.
I think we got some more in there. Don't worry.
Yeah. Again, we don't like making fun of actors, but...
No.
Okay, so Mutant Chronicles. Trev just said it's based on a pre-existing IP. It's based on an RPG role-playing game. So like a board game. Before I go... Well, I mean... Card game, board game, RPG type
I
thing?
do, like, in my head, those are kind of different things. Because, like, when I think of, like, board games, you do think of, like, I know they're, like, super complex now. Like, I'm old enough that when I think of board games, I'm still thinking of, like, the game of life, and, like, just Monopoly. But now I know it's more like, Settlers of Catan and, Railroad Tycoon or where these things are. Or, like, Risk. I think of those as, like, board games. But when you're talking about RPG, this is kind of probably more in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
This is the sitting down and being creative with your friends and playing characters in this like pre-existing world with a very complex, fully formed mythology behind it.
So complex that I'm not going to go over all of it.
so complex that I do want to read a little bit later,
yes.
just for shits and giggles. Yeah. But yeah.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the role-playing game, I got to kind of ask you a little bit of your history with it. Like you just said, you can remember the Game of Life. That's your board game of choice, which came to you first, which is hilarious. Because first of all, I love the Game of Life, number one.
The Game of Life is great. That's why. So like, I was hoping you weren't about to like talk shit about it or something.
No, the Game of Life is awesome. No, it's
yeah. I mean, I'm a Clue man. Clue is my game, but
okay. I like. Well, this isn't a board game talk, but anyways, I was like, do you like Kerplunk?
I do like Kerplunk. Yeah, Kerplunk's fun. Yeah.
Kerplunk is very anxiety driven, and I like that. But when it comes to RPGs and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, I'm sure we talked a little bit about this during our last Witch Hunter episode. So I just kind of want to be brief. I don't have much history with ever playing. I've kind of, lurked with people playing or been aware of people playing, but I've never like set aside the time to do so. That was always my hang up. Like I have some friends even recently within the last like year plus being like, hey, we want to get a D&D, troop together, every second Sunday or just once a month. And I'm like, I can't commit to that.
Yeah.
I run a very unsuccessful podcast. So I don't have the time. So that's always been my issue with RPGs. Like I think I would love it, and I think I would have a total fucking blast with the creativity and voices and having a good time. However, sometimes I get anxious with all the rules and all the remembering and all the legions and all the factions, and then I get a little bit too. It all becomes fugazi for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What about you?
I get kind of same. I mean, I have more experience with RPGs than you do. And as you said, we've probably talked about this a little bit before, so I'll keep it as brief as I can. Mm-hmm. But there was a period where me and some friends were playing one called Deadlands every week. And I think I mentioned then that the issue with that was like it wouldn't be called Dungeon Master because I think that's proprietary to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
But the friend who was like running the game was taking it very, very seriously, and a lot of us who were playing it were kind of doing it more as a goof. And so it was fun though. Like you said, it is fun to create the character. It is fun to go on the adventures. But that's the only one I've ever played, and then that just kind of fell apart. And like you said, it's just really a matter of as we get older, it's just harder to have weekly hangouts with your friends. Mm-hmm. So even if I wanted to do one now, I do think it's kind of neat how I know a lot of people do like Zoom Dungeons and Dragons, which is probably that probably helps a lot, right? The fact that you no longer have to actually get together physically to play these. I could see maybe doing something like that, but yeah, I don't know. It's just maybe because it's been so long and because I have other interests. It's just like, do I really need to get obsessed with like another thing? And I will tell you again, we're not even talking about the movie, but we're just talking about like the complex mythology of this one. If I was going to get into some of the existing like RPGs I know are out there, I don't think Mutant Chronicles would be the one I would jump into. I mean, I know there's ones that exist like that are, kind of take place in like more like Lovecraftian worlds and like more horror based ones. That's probably where I'd fall. Reading over like what this one's about, I'll admit my eyes just kind of started to glaze over a little bit.
Yeah, like I am more. I mean, I guess I'm in the middle because I do like the fantasy element of those types of RPGs, like of certain video games I used to play. Like I loved Heroes of Might and Magic, and that was like a game that I just absolutely loved. And you get hobbits and dragons and skeletons and like that kind of fantasy. And then there was this one board game. I was trying to Google it while you were talking, and I droned out not listening to you. But I was trying to find the board game I used to play. And listeners,
Candyland.
Listeners, if you can remember this game, it's a fantasy horror type of, like, again, witchcraft and wizardry type of a board game. and you play it with a VHS tape on the TV, and it guides you
one of
along.
those.
Yeah. And it has on the black case of the game, it's got like 2 green eyes for like the guy who's like guiding you along. I used to play that a lot with my cousin, who has since passed. Me and him and my brother used to play all the time. He used to babysit us as kids. We have, cousins that are a little older than us, like by a generation or so. And that was a great game. Damn. Anyway, if you can think of that, or if you can find it, Trev, that'd be great. But I like the idea of playing these games, but like you said, they're time consuming. And this one having more of a weird religious, political, sci-fi element to it. It's almost like a game that doesn't know which lane to pick. Does that make a lot of sense?
I mean, I think it's just my main issue with like why I have a hard time getting into these is like kind of the same reason why, I do. It's not, I'm only half joking when I default to like the original or the board games I grew up with, and why I'm not so much into modern board games. Because when board games started to get like really complex and it was like, hey, do we want to have a game night? Okay, well, make sure you set aside the first 90 minutes to explain the rules, like even like board games now, it's kind of like, oh man. And then with these, like the amount of like, I feel like the amount of homework you would just have to do on this world to kind of, make a go at it. And look, I'm not like poo-pooing that in general, because obviously you and I are both big fans of a lot of different kind of franchise things. Like I like a built world, but because I already have the worlds of so many comic book properties in my head and movie properties and TV show properties, do I want to really try and fit like another one in there to play this weekly game? Maybe not, so that just becomes an issue for me.
These board games I'm so glad you mentioned like kind of like the rules, the beginning, summary of everything and what people are going to do for the next 4 hours. I used to go to a couple game nights for friends that they were just like board game people, and they owned like 500 board games, and they knew all the rules to all of them. And I just felt like I would get very nervous in the sense of like remembering everything that they're telling me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like especially because usually these board game nights would entail heavy drinking and potentially, a marijuana cigarette of some type. And I don't partake anymore just because I'm a raging alcoholic, number one. So I don't, I don't really smoke anymore. But I just felt all the time when I would be sitting there and there's like 7 of us, right? And I'm there, high off my kite. They're explaining rules to me of like, again, this faction and that faction. And, if you roll this dice, you're out. And I become I can't partake.
I think for me, like, and I'm guessing you'll probably agree with this too, I think when I started to lose interest in these kind of modern board games is when it got to the point where before every turn you have to go, now can I do this?
Yes.
Can you tell me again if I can do this? Like if you can't just remember the simplistic, element of a game enough to just play it without asking that on every turn, then it's not the kind of board game that I'm going to be really into. I might try, there's a couple I look at and I think are interesting looking, and I bought like this Texas Chainsaw Massacre board game that so far I've not been able to get my wife to play with me. But that's like even like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you're just running away from a redneck cannibal family, right? But it seems very complex, and the other thing too is all these board games now cost like $70 because they're so involved, and it's just like, oh man. So not only are they like you have to spend so much time learning the rules and then the gameplay goes on forever, but it's also a very expensive hobby, and again, I have enough expensive hobbies.
Okay, let me give you a little bit of details of this Mutant Chronicles. Right. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go over everything, but there's a few things I've highlighted that I want to explain. It's in the distant future. Earth has depleted all of their natural resources. The world is run by 5 mega corporations. And that's it. The government entities are all gone now. Again, it's just corporations. I know that's so far off where we're heading in the world.
I know. I can't imagine crazy. A world like an oligarch kind of world where like corporations are in charge. That's so weird.
It's wild. January 20th is the day that we are recording 2025. Okay. Anyway, these mega corporations have private military forces to fight for resources. People are spread across the world, but also other worlds like Venus and Mars, because again, natural resources are depleted. There's a major power in the universe. It's the Brotherhood, which is like a fanatical religious organization. They are meant to meet the threat of the Dark Legion, which is an ancient evil comprising of 5 dark apostles. The most powerful armies of the solar system, according to the Dark Legion, are comprised of legionnaires, who are resurrected corpses of fallen megacorp heroes and foot soldiers. Necromutants, hideously modified humanoids, centurions, the lethal lieutenants of the Dark Legion, and Nepharites, who are behemoths of unimaginable power, I'm reading here. That's all I'm willing to tell you.
You don't want to go further? You don't want to talk about Nero, the fictional 10th planet, and the citadel that exists on it? Or when the Imperial Conquistadors accidentally broke the first seal of repulsion by stepping through the Ring of Salt? You don't want to talk about all this?
See, remember when I told you I get anxious? No, this is all just nonsense. And you know what? Nonsense that started in 1993. So this thing has been around for a long time, and it is successful. They had, miniature. Remember how? Do you guys have Games Workshops in the States? Is it like a franchise?
Do you just mean like hobby shops?
I guess so. Yeah. Ours is actually, there's one that's like legitimately called Games Workshop. But what it is like you can definitely go there for all those like small little figurines and you can paint.
Oh yeah.
I guess Warhammer.
Because like here, I used to be back in the day before my town had an official comic book store. I bought my comic books at a game shop.
Okay. So then there you go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is big with that crowd as well.
Yeah,
comic books, novels,
the little miniatures you get that you paint. Yeah, and then like you said, novels, video game spinoffs. There was I saw there was like an SNES and Genesis game called Doom Troopers. That's like in the Mutant Chronicle world. Yeah.
So a lot of history for this property, which again I just told you made $6,000 and $2.1 million worldwide. So like the audience did not come out for this movie. Like at all.
Well, and I mean, let's also just say this again, we're not getting into our thoughts on the movie, but if you were listening to, Chris and I like talk about that really complex mythology and you're thinking, oh boy, man, do I have to remember all that for the movie? No, because most of that is kind of pushed aside for the movie. So there's, again, like this is an adaptation of this like long existing IP in this world, but I think it's safe to say it's a very pared down adaptation or loose adaptation. And we'll obviously talk about that. In terms of their approach to this.
Yeah, like Simon Hunter is on record as saying there was actually like a few other older iterations of this movie. So like I said, it came out in...
I definitely want to talk about that because there's some interesting names here.
So yeah, the property was published in 1993. And right away in the mid-90s, a producer who was in charge of Judge Dredd, which is
Edward R. Pressman. I like this guy, actually. Judge Dredd is obviously the one you're going to pick up because of our podcast.
Yes. We covered Judge Dredd, so go listen to that episode.
If you're like a kind of movie nerd, like Edward R. Pressman is just a name you will recognize because his name does pop up in the opening credits of a lot of movies you might be into. Right. He's produced a lot of junk. Like he's he's produced like The Island of Dr. Moreau, the 1994 Street Fighter, things like that. But he's also the producer of like Wall Street, Talk Radio, Bad Lieutenant, so and the Crow and American Psycho. So he's done it all. He's worked with like a lot of big filmmakers. He's an executive producer on Conan the Barbarian. He's actually he's in the Sam Raimi movie Crime Wave that I know is like, that's the one that like, him and the Coens worked on, and then they all like kind of, disavow it nowadays. But I like that movie. It's a very flawed movie. It's a very weird movie, but I think it has its charms. And Edward R. Pressman not only produced that, but he's also in it, and he's actually really funny in it. But I think that might be his only acting performance. But yeah.
Well,
he's very, very prolific for sure. Yeah,
for sure. Like his career spans many flops and successes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We just lost him last year, actually. I guess 2 years ago now, January. Actually, we lost him in January of 2023. So.
During our New Year's punishment party, discussing the Punisher. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that.
I hope that's not what did it.
Okay. He tried to get this movie made with John Carpenter directing, and of course,
in the mid-90s. Yeah,
of course, we love John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Have you met him? I met him once at a convention.
I've never met John Carpenter, and honestly, I don't know if I want to. I have been now in his vicinity. So when the weekend of my marriage, my wife and I also went to the Joe Bob Briggs Drive-In Jamboree, and right. John Carpenter was the guest of honor at that. He helped Joe Bob host screenings of Prince of Darkness and The Thing, and then was given a Lifetime Achievement Award. Cool. And he was very much the John Carpenter you expected and kind of wanted him to be, and that he barely seemed to want to talk about the movies, and he just wanted to every time he was on stage, he was just very vocal about how he couldn't wait to get off stage, go back to his little camper and smoke some weed. So.
yeah. When I met him, I got him to sign my my Thing Blu-ray, and I think I can't remember what I asked him, but then he looked over at his handler to see if he was allowed, and then the handler was like, "No." And I was like, "Okay," and then he looked at me and he kind of made eyes at the guy, being like, "I don't know, he's whatever." He was just kind of there for the paycheck, of course. But it was cool because it's fucking John Carpenter. He's allowed to be that way.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. He's one of my favorite cantankerous grumpy assholes.
Yes, I've met some grumps, and one of them is in this movie.
Yes, okay. We can retell that story later.
Yes, yeah. So I've met some grumps at these conventions, but John Carpenter, I give a pass because he's awesome.
Of course.
So he tried to make this movie at once, but then because of the string of bombs or flops, I guess, in a row, Judge Dredd, The Crow, City of Angels, and The Island of Dr. Moreau, Pressman couldn't do the movie that he wanted. Right. So then Stephen Norrington came on, and he went on to direct Blade, the original Blade.
He stepped away from this to direct Blade. Probably a good call.
Big time. And then another guy, what's his name? Roger Christian. He failed to make this movie, but then went on to make Battlefield Earth.
Maybe a bad call.
So this movie had a time. It had a time getting off the ground. It kind of stayed dormant for a while, eh? I guess the mid-90s to really the mid-2000s when Simon Hunter created, a 7-minute short or something to kind of sell his vision on the movie. He worked on it for 3 years. It's, mostly green screen, but also not familiar with the game. I just wanted to bring that up. He was not familiar with the game in, really any respect. So going back to what you said about, did you need to memorize all the shit I told you about the game? And why this one is so different than the game. The reason is because he's not familiar with it, but then also two, very shoestring budget for the scope and ambition of the project. So, those older iterations we just talked about were going to be big tentpole movies, exploring more of the world, being grander in scope. But this one was more down and dirty. Simon Hunter kept saying extreme style. I just want to keep saying that. He thought of this movie being made with an extreme style that's going to be much more interesting with a steampunk look to it, and he did not want to be bland. So,
I think what we have to mention here, and maybe I don't know if you were planning to bring this up or not, but because, talking about the long road this movie had to get to the screen finally and those previous iterations. If you think about, in the mid-90s, Carpenter obviously had a fall off, but mid-90s Carpenter is still, a name. And I'm sure whatever Pressman was planning there, he was looking at that as a potential prestige project. Mm-hmm. And then trying to get it set up at 20th Century Fox with Stephen Norrington and then later with Roger Christian. I'm guessing all those versions were thought to be kind of, this is a big IP, I'm going to make a big budget, summer kind of blockbuster out of this, or a potential one. Yeah. And that was probably what was holding it back, right? Because I would say, even though we talked about how this is clearly a successful franchise, I wouldn't, just from my perspective, it doesn't seem to have even the cachet of, say, a Dungeons and Dragons, right? So
sure.
To go really big budget with this is a question, and I'm guessing that was probably one of the big things that was hampering all of these previous iterations. One thing that I don't want to call it a huge sea change in Hollywood, but to get to the Simon Hunter version, we have to point out that in 2004 we get a movie which you and I will talk about someday called Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow.
Yes.
And then in 2005 we get a genuinely successful film called Sin City. Mm-hmm. And in 2006, we get an even more successful film called 300. And as I say those three movies, those of you who have seen them all probably know what I'm alluding to, and that is this new visual style of just plopping your actors down in a completely green screen environment and adding in everything behind them and allowing the movie to look highly stylized and artificial and fake, and just being like, well, we can make these things cheaper now because all we really need is the actors and then a warehouse and then and some costumes, and everything else we'll add in post. And that was the approach Simon Hunter decided to take, which allowed them to make this independently. But also did mean part of the reason I think, even though he wasn't familiar with the game, I'm sure he did his homework a little bit afterwards. But just even on a budgetary, aspect, it's like, well, we're gonna have to pare this down because we can make it cheaper this way. The audience is ready to look at movies like this, so it's not going to bother us. But we have to really bring the world down to scale for that reason.
I'm sure I will talk about this more, or we will talk about this more in specifics when we get to actually talking about the review. But it is odd to me that Simon Hunter would choose this approach without any real, I guess, I don't want to say education, experience, maybe?
Yeah.
In VFX or something. Like, usually a movie like this, Zack Snyder, let's talk Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder is famously visually, I guess, interesting, or just interested in the visuals, period. Like, he's very involved with the VFX. He understands VFX. Say what you want about his actual films. And I think some are actually great and some are just junk, but his style and his visual language is almost undeniable. You know what I mean? Like, he does have talent there, and it's just interesting to me that Simon Hunter would take this approach coming from like doing really nothing before. You know what I mean? Like, wanting to break out into the film industry, obviously wanted to be a filmmaker and a director, but he's not coming from some like VFX house. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
And that's what I mean. It's like you have to wonder how much of it was like looking at, and like obviously Sky Captain, a kind of a notorious bomb, which is why we will cover it someday. But with the success of Sin City and 300, and then there's more I'm probably forgetting, right? There was just kind of like this like plethora of movies that looked like this around this time.
Spirit.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's again like a Frank Miller one, but I think maybe to speak to what you're saying is because those movies did so well, there might have just been this like level of cockiness from like young filmmakers of saying like, well, I can do that, right? You just need like some green screens and the actors, like, and then we'll like figure it all out in post. And this we'll even talk about. This is a very like this is a movie that was very much a post-driven movie. Like once they had filmed stuff, it still took forever for them to kind of put the rest of it together. So,
I mean, honestly, like I guess, do we want to talk a little bit of our two leading men real quickly before jumping into it, or do you want to talk about them during the review? What do you want?
No, we can mention who they are. I mean, we've already said one of them is Thomas Jane and the other being Ron Perlman. I think that's like a part of it too, right? Is like whatever interest there might have been in like, oh, can we sell this movie to like an audience, right? Internationally and beyond, is like, well, let's at least get some like names that are just popular enough and kind of especially in like the nerdosphere, right?
Get the Punisher, get Hellboy.
Yeah, like for Thomas Jane, I wanted to point that out in particular because Thomas Jane is coming off of actually a pretty good run at this point, right? Like after, obviously he kind of pops in Boogie Nights in 1997, and then he's like, in 99 he already gets like a lead role in like Deep Blue Sea, but he's coming off of, now whether these aren't all hits, obviously, but he's still like a name in them, right? Like he's one of the main cast in Dreamcatcher. He's the Punisher. And then he stars in The Mist. And it's not like these might not be huge hits, but there's some cachet to like, okay, he's like a marketable person who Hollywood is willing to put like in the lead role. And so that's the lead into this. So he's definitely marketable. And of course, Ron Perlman is just kind of always dependable, right? He's always, Hellboy. Yeah. Like he's everyone loves Ron Perlman. So we'll probably just get some people to rent or go see this in the theater just because they're in it.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting that this movie came out the year of Hellboy 2. And just an odd year for Ron. Like, again, we'll talk about it right away, but Hellboy 2 first is that movie fucking rocks. So,
yes.
Anyway. Other than Devon Aoki, do you want to just talk about the movie?
Devon Aoki, I guarantee you, in this primarily because she was in Sin City. So, again, that's
you're so right. I was wondering why, because I only ever remember her from Too Fast, Too Furious. But
yeah, she had a really brief moment there. I say she retired from acting to concentrate on family, which I always applaud. If you can get out of that hell business, if you don't need to be there, go for it. Totally. But yeah, no, she was in Sin City, and I'm sure some of the thinking there was then like, well, we're trying to do the Sin City like vibe here, so let's bring in one of the cast members.
Yeah. Okay, want to talk about this movie?
Hey, you know what? I know nothing else about the IP, so yes, let's just get to the movie.
The enemies of man, the mutants, came from the outside. It is the end of every living thing, everywhere, and for all time.
Begin the evacuation.
Evacuation?
We are finished here.
Am I to understand that you would abandon the Earth? How many millions do you think you'll leave behind? And do you think that the enemy will stop with this world? They'll follow you. There is still hope!
What hope?
Give me 20 soldiers and a ship.
And what can these 20 do that our armies could not?
For a mission.
Yeah, save the world kind of thing.
Many men think they're going to die. A few of us know it.
Any last words? Here we go!
The story is set in the year 2707. The world is now run by 4 corporations. The technologies are steam-powered, and mankind has exhausted all of Earth's natural resources. Many people have been evacuated to Mars, but millions are left on Earth to fend for themselves against the elements, corruption, and killer mutants. A group of soldiers are now tasked with finding and destroying an ancient machine that has the ability to create an endless mutant population. How will this ragtag group survive this suicide mission? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. And Chris, I want you to talk about it first because I know your journey with this viewing of this movie was very, very interesting. As we alluded to in our last episode, you didn't even know what kind of genre this movie was when we added this to the list, and you were going into this very blind. So I want to hear about that, and then I'll talk about like my history with this movie.
Sure. Yeah. When we come up with our theme months, right? We like to plop them in, for pun reasons or whatnot. So just Mutant GENEuary sounded good. So obviously I looked in the list and I found 2 movies with mutant in the title. And I go, boom, we're good for January 2025. Now, I read out a few Chronicles, titles, right? A couple of those, YA, by the way. So immediately when I repeated to Trev that we were doing Mutant Chronicles, and then we talked about it in, I think, the New Mutants episode or something. And I said, yeah, I don't know anything about this. Like, it's another YA adaptation, right? And Trev, you were like, oh, no. Couldn't be further from the truth on that one. So I had no idea what the hell this was. And usually I do all the research stuff prior to watching the movie, just to kind of give me some level of context. But just for fun, I was like, you know what? I'm so off the beaten path, it sounds like, on this one. I'm going to go in this so blind. I'm not going to watch the trailer. I'm not going to watch anything. The only thing I saw was a screen cap of Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman, who I didn't even know that they were in this. So I saw that screenshot. I sent it to Trav, and I go, wow, this is all I know. So having said that, I go into this super, super blind. I watched it a couple days ago, and I'm going to say 2 things can be true at once. I can applaud ambition, but also say this is a total piece of shit.
Yeah.
So this is one of those movies that you're like, where did it touch me? Like, why did you make me watch this piece of shit?
Yeah.
This is like one of those not a movie movies. Like, I just yeah, Thomas Jane is in it. I like him. Ron Perlman's in it. I like him. John Malkovich is in it for about 5 minutes. He shot his role over 2 days.
Yeah. Theoretically like him.
Theoretically. But you know what? This is a movie that is just so full of cliches, and they're so poorly done, that if you're gonna load up a movie with cliches and things that I've seen before again and again, and I'm so familiar with, Men on a Mission movies and all this other shit, I've seen so many of those movies. Your execution does matter. And the execution of this movie is quite poor. And it becomes like embarrassing and distracting. Brittany, my fiance, sat on the couch for a solid 15 to 20 minutes during this, coming and going. And she was kind of flabbergasted why I was watching this. And I kept pausing it, and I looked at her and I go, this is just like painful. This is just so bad. And I feel so bad that Simon Hunter worked on this for 3 years.
Yeah.
3 years, Trev. Could you imagine doing anything for 3 years and creating this? Respectfully?
I can't imagine working. I mean, even I feel bad for Malkovich working on it for 2 days. I can't imagine doing this for 2 days.
Dude, this is, I'm so glad. I wrote Sky Captain vibes in my notes, and I didn't know, the research beforehand. So I'm glad we found that later. But I found this is like baby's first screenwriting as well. Anyway, I'll let you it sounds like you're going to say very much an echo what I'm about to say, but I'll throw it to
I
you.
like this a lot. No.
Yeah, I'm so sure. even though I did write, I said, this is the kind of movie that I picture all those horrible D-grade movies that Trev logs on Letterboxd are.
Well, okay, I'm going to get to that, right? In terms
sure.
of like, in terms of that is a
why this is
point.
different. Why this is different than those.
Exactly. Because here's like this is sadly my second time watching this movie. I did see this when it first hit video back in 2008. I remember. I think I like rented it from Family Video or whatever.
You got conned.
Well, so I was trying to like remember why did I rent this, right? Because I'm sure it couldn't have been that I saw a trailer and was like, that looks good. And I'm thinking 2008, it's just entirely based off of I like Thomas Jane, right? I like Thomas Jane. I like Ron Perlman. Oh, and and as you said, I do like watching bad movies, right? So even if it's bad, maybe I'll have some fun with it or whatever. But like I said, this is also coming off of a Punisher movie with Thomas Jane that I thought was pretty good. The Mist, which I loved. He had even done a movie called Stander recently, which he's very good in. It was one of his best lead roles. So I was really on the Thomas Jane train at the time. Not to, I'm a poet and I didn't know it. And obviously Perlman, always loved Perlman. So I just like, okay, I'll check this out or whatever, right? And I can't remember if I told you this or not at any point when we were talking about doing the Mutant GENEuary, but this was honestly a movie that when I first created this podcast or talked to you about the podcast and created the list for the podcast, and I put it in there and I knew we'd get to it someday. This is a movie I was always like dreading that we would have to get to because my memory was like, oh my God, I don't remember anything about that movie except I remember just being so miserable watching it.
Yep.
Because I don't think I watched it with a group of friends. I think I just watched it by myself. And my entire memory was like, I hated the experience of watching that so much. So I was like, and then when you decided to do this Mutant GENEuary, I don't think I want to tell you that because I didn't want to pepper it too much, but I know I was thinking like, oh no. And and the lead up to it, this is like one of the rare cases where I kept even warning my wife because she likes to watch all these with me. And I was like, Liz, I'm telling you, this is going to be a bad one. This is going to be a rough one.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we are undergoing divorce proceedings now because I showed her this. It's a rough watch. And the problem is not that it's stupid because you can be stupid.
I wish it was stupid.
Yes. Because your point to like the kind of movies I enjoy, you can be stupid and fun. Like a version of this that would probably rule is if Paul W.S. Anderson directed this, right? Like if this was made with the same vibe as like the Resident Evil films, I'd be totally on board. So the problem is not that it's stupid. The problem is that it's ugly and boring.
Yes.
And for a Men on a Mission movie, a genre I love Men on a Mission movies. As I said, it's got actors I like. I'm not the big, I can't remember if I think we talked about this before when we did Moral Engines. I don't really love the steampunk aesthetic in general.
Yeah, we both are on that train. We don't, it doesn't really vibe with us. No.
It's not an aesthetic that speaks to me. But even beyond that, like, even if I could probably still enjoy a steampunk thing if it was like a little visually interesting. And this movie is just murky and like a real like slog to look at.
It's got that weird desaturated look of the mid 2000s. There was like certain movies that did this all the time.
You're trying to hide the green screen nature of it by desaturating it to like a really heavy degree, right? Yes. But you're also just making it like really hard to look at, and just it's also terribly sound mixed. Like I don't know, like the score is like way too quiet at times when it should be booming. Everything about the sound mix is like really just poor. There's moments that should have score and just don't.
Or special, or it's like sound effects.
Yeah, again, like to say that they spent 3 years on this, and it's like this was like the final version that came together. Here's my other memory of this, right? And and then we can get into like more specifics.
Sure.
Is that I said like the reason I rented this at the time was like I'm all in on Thomas Jane. I'm all in on Thomas Jane. Okay, here's another like lead movie from him. I know it's like I'm pretty sure by the time I rented it, I'd probably heard it was quite bad, but I was like, well, but it might still be fun, right? And I remember I've never forgotten this. I remember watching this movie and thinking to myself, oh, he's done. That's it. Like you don't start a movie like this and come back from it. Like if he had any chance of being like an A-lister, it's gone. Like if this is the kind of movie he's making after like The Mist and The Punisher and Stander, and guess what? I was right. Like
yeah, totally.
he gets like a brief reprieve in doing the popular HBO show Hung after this, but in terms of like his filmography, if you, as I said, he had like a really decent run up to this, and then you look at the post Mutant Chronicles Thomas Jane filmography, and hey, I like the guy, but we just gotta say, it's a lot of shit.
Yeah,
it's like,
totally.
and this is the turning point. It's like, oh no, this is a real misstep. Yeah, quite poor. Definitely one of the worst movies we've done for sure.
Oh,
yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
This is proof that movies are hard.
Yeah.
Like movies are hard to make, and this feels like an entry-level VFX film student film. You know what I mean? Like somebody who's like made like, again, a proof of concept. Maybe in 7 minutes this is okay, but for an hour and 45, it's just not. It's taking itself way too seriously. It's got obviously extremely limited resources, which we will get to actually quantify the extreme resources available to this movie in the post-production process. But it is very high concept, very ambitious, but it just doesn't have the talent or means behind it to bring it to fruition. And I'm so glad you said it reminded you of like if this was a Paul W.S. Anderson movie or something, like there could be some fun to be had. There is a movie that I'm going to mention, and go with me here, because I think you might agree. This reminded me of something like Megalopolis, in the sense that there's a retro future, there's political messaging, dodgy effects, self-seriousness, but there's something fascinating about Megalopolis.
Yeah.
There's something that you can't take your eyes off it, being like, what the hell is this? and it's actually quite entertaining, and it's funny even if it's not trying to be funny. There's something there in Megalopolis that is like an all-time bad movie, quote unquote. You know what I mean? While this one is just, it's like it's all of those elements, but done in the most boring, juvenile way. Like the dialogue is so terrible and so obnoxious. Because can I get into specifics here? Is it okay if I,
Hey, your funeral, buddy. Sure, try it.
Okay. I want to talk about the dialogue, and I want to talk about these characters, or shall I say, caricatures of characters. Yes. If you're gonna make a Man on the Mission movie, I gotta fucking love and root for these men on a mission, men and women on a mission. I really do. And this movie, it relies so heavily on this Ron Perlman narration and doesn't allow the characters to like talk and interact and get to know each other and to actually, make me root for them. Instead, they have terrible dialogue like this. I'm just going to read it to you because I don't even want to find the clip and edit it in. I don't really want to put the work into it. But he goes, they're talking to Devin Aoki on the plane or whatever, on the chopper. The guy goes, oh, you make it sound like we're going to fuck. And then Devin Aoki goes, hey, you can fuck a lot of people. You only die once. And then this other guy goes, that's fucked. and I mean, again, that is baby's first screenwriting. That is trying to be badass, trying to be poignant, when it should just be trying to be dumb schlock.
Yeah, and I think, would you agree that there's like a brief moment near the end when you're in like the final part of the mission, right, where it starts to maybe come close to what it should have been the whole time?
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, this is getting slightly fun now because it is just like complete action, and it's like poorly done action, but that's kind of funny, right? And you're kind of down to the only characters that matter now, or at least the actors you like. And so it briefly comes to life for that, if we want to be nice. But throughout that, I'd say the only actor who really does seem to be on the right vibe for this movie is Thomas Jane, to a certain degree. Not always, But I think there's some moments near the end where he starts playing like the overdone, like kind of noir man on a mission hero. And he gets some like there's that part where it is the line of the movie, right? Where the whole thing is he's a character who has no faith, right? He doesn't believe in like the kind of like religious aspect of this mission that Ron Perlman, the leader of this like religious sect, is bringing to it. And Ron Perlman keeps telling him, you just need to have faith, you need to believe. And there's the moment where he says, you have to believe. And Thomas Jane replies, I wasn't made to believe, I was made to fuck shit up. And it's like, that's the moment where you're like, oh man, I wish the whole movie was that,
Right.
Like that kind of like over the top, dumb B-movie machismo, and not just like, so, like I said, just so boring and like barely exploring these characters, which is a silly thing to say in a movie like this. But I think the other thing about Megalopolis, that's a really good comparison point. Megalopolis has a sincerity that makes it fun, right?
Yes.
Like it's a, I mean, I enjoy Megalopolis. I'm willing to admit it's a bad movie, but it's a very enjoyable bad movie, right? And part of that comes from how sincere, like you can tell Francis Ford Coppola is with it. And I think that's the thing about Paul W.S. Anderson too, is like with the Resident Evil movies, I think it's very clear that Paul W.S. Anderson just loves making over-the-top B movies. And I watch this and I think about Simon Hunter acknowledging that he didn't really know this franchise, didn't know this IP. And I think he was looking at this more to kind of come back to what you said about like why he even made this movie. I think this is almost like an audition reel for him, right? Or hey, I can make this kind of movie. Here it is. It's like a sizzle reel for the kind of effects, green screen type of approach I'd make. And so the movie just doesn't even have like, it doesn't feel like it's made by someone who like either loves the IP or loves this kind of movie. I don't know. It just that's why I feel like it just kind of lays there dormant when it should be like kind of getting your blood boiling with excitement, which never happens except for, like I said, maybe for like 5 minutes near the end.
But that's a great point, because that's why it comes off lazy. Like it comes off just, corporations are bad. That's the messaging, but also killer mutants. Why? I don't know.
This kind of, we're going to have to keep coming back to the limitations they put on themselves by deciding to make this so cheaply and making it independent production. I know Hunter has even talked about this in some of the materials, that we've looked at, of just saying like, hey, are you going to use all the really interesting monsters and mutants from the games and from like the RPGs and the video games? No. we don't have the budget for that. So he just created his own kind of mutant for this and said, our mutants are basically just zombies with their hands turned into bone swords. And that's it. Every single one of them looks like that. And, I heard there's never more than like 5 on screen at a time, if that, because of the low budget. So it's like you have like just one look. It's not even that interesting of a look. It's pretty cheesy. And it's like, okay, again, like this is called Mutant Chronicles. I want to see more mutants. I want to see more monsters. You get so bored of that it's the same thing every time, because every attack is the same, because it's just these guys with bone swords. And it's like, oh, all right, we saw this before, and now you have to sit through almost 2 hours of this. It's not a short movie either. That's
no, it's not. That was surprising. I love that you just said that and talked about him saying that he didn't want to use other creatures because of the budget and this and that. His exact quote was this: "Better not to do it than to do it badly." Simon.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree, actually.
Buddy, did you watch your movie? I'd rather them at least try to even change the way their face looks, or honestly, put the bone sword on the other arm. like they are all the exact same type. Because again, listeners, the men on the mission are going to destroy this machine, and this machine takes injured soldiers from the wars and all this other stuff, takes them alive, puts them on a conveyor belt, and then they get injected with something, and they get stitched up, and they get changed physically into like just a gruesome mutant creature. That's the idea. But every single soldier we see throughout the entire movie, are we to believe that the exact same genome process affects everybody the exact same way? So when I go back to my thing about this being full of cliches and being poorly done and just being so bland, your execution matters. You have to make the bone saw on the different arm.
Or like, why don't some people have like a bone axe, you know, or like a bone chainsaw or something? Yeah.
Totally. Something simple.
Oh my God, this guy has a bone trident, you know, like, come on, give us something.
100%. Even so much that, spoilers, everybody, I'm going to talk about nearing the end here. Thomas Jane gets injured and he falls onto the conveyor belt, and then it starts to change him into a mutant. Well, he breaks free, okay?
Yeah, he discovers the secret that none of the thousands of people who have gone through this machine discovered up to that point. Just turn your head slightly when the thing tries to stick you, and you can escape from it.
And anyway, he's disfigured a little bit, you know, half his head and his arm. The same arm, like I said, the same arm is going to change. the right arm. But he doesn't seem to be any stronger. He doesn't seem to be any faster. He doesn't seem to have gained some mutant ability. Like, when it happened, when he was being changed, I was like, okay, the movie's coming alive. Thomas Jane is about to go fucking Super Saiyan mutant on these bitches. No, not even a little bit. No. He kind of gets his ass kicked.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of issues with this machine because the other thing about it is, like, you know, they said the entire mission revolves on this. Oh, there's this ancient machine buried deep in the earth, and the mutants bring like the fallen soldiers of humanity to this machine and turn them into mutants. And the entire concern is like there's like this, like, I don't want to call it a ticking clock, but there's like this pressure on them, like, we have to destroy this machine as soon as we can, because they're gonna just overtake the entire planet, you know, like they're creating these forces. And then when we see the machine and see the process, it's so slow. It runs so slow, and there's like, in one person's on the conveyor belt at a time. I was kind of like, I guess they can probably make like 200 soldiers a day or something. I don't know that this is this much of a worry. You know, like, I know. It's just like, it's again like the limitations of what they're doing budget wise doesn't match what they're telling us. And the other thing about that is, because of that, because the movie takes itself a little too seriously, because it's not as silly and stupid fun as you want it to be. That's the kind of thing where then when something like completely ridiculous happens narratively, it sticks out more like a sore thumb, right? The movie starts with this like opening, like, you know, war scene where Thomas Jane is a soldier for one of these corporations, and all these corporations are involved in these different land wars throughout the planet. Yeah. And we see this like battle between Imperial, I believe, which is like, you know, the British corporation versus the German corporation, and it's very World War I coded. You know, it's trench warfare. But during this battle, the mutants come out for they accidentally break the seal, and the mutants come out of the earth and attack both armies, and the two armies have to work together. And Thomas Jane's best friend, right, his best friend in this war, gets taken by the mutants. And of course, the assumption is, well, he was taken, he was either killed or turned into a mutant himself. And this is the whole reason Thomas Jane even gets involved in the mission, because Ron Perlman promises everyone on the mission, hey, if you come with me, I'll give you passes that you can give to anyone, any loved ones in your life that will get them off the planet. They can go to Mars. And so he gives those passes to the family of his best friend. He says, you know, unfortunately, I couldn't save your husband, couldn't save your father. He died. I'm sorry. He's my best friend, but I'll at least get you off the planet. Then we know that, like, from the narrative, because you said Ron Perlman keeps, you know, narrating this movie, that like 6 weeks have passed. And when they get to the machine, hey, just by pure coincidence, the moment they step into the cave where the machine is, they just happen to be dragging his friend by, taking him to the machine. And for 6 weeks, he's had this horrible injury, and he hasn't died yet. And it's like, oh, give me a break. And like I said, in a really dumb movie, that would be funny. But here you just like go like, oh man, like how the movie is like asking me to accept this now, and it just doesn't work, you know.
It's just poorly put together. And I think there's no tongue-in-cheek really either. Like, again, I've mentioned it's self-serious at times, and I've listened to a few Simon Hunter interviews leading up, and he keeps saying, I want people to go and have fun with this, and bring your friends, and you drink a little bit, and man, you're gonna have a blast, and you know, all these. It's just a rockin' B-movie schlocky time, and it's not. Like, it's just drab. You know, like, it's just boring, and it is self-serious. He says that it's a silly tone. It's not. It's not a silly tone.
I would enjoy it if it was, like, for sure. Like,
absolutely. Like, there's really no one-liners. That one-liner you said. Everything else is just played deathly straight. And
no, like, we're watching this team get taken out like one by one. You know, I made the joke earlier about the hand grenade sacrifices. That is, 3 people do that. But the movie like acts like we care every time one of them dies, and we do not. Like you've not
No.
like, and like that's the thing, it's you're not being silly, but you're also like imparting this like this fake dramatic tension, and I don't give a shit when any of these people die. Like I'm just like, okay, get to like the final two characters we know are gonna be there, right?
There's even this moment when Ron Perlman gathers the team together, right? And then one of his narration starts. And his narration is just saying the name of each character and giving like maybe one sentence description of why they're there. And it's all just like awful, lame, mean mug caricatures of these people. And it reminded me of like Suicide Squad. Not the Suicide Squad, the shitty one.
Yeah.
The shitty one. It reminded me of like, you're just telling me, you're not showing me, these characters are not interacting at all. Like you need to have some sort of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And you don't need them to be good people. That's another thing too.
No.
I said they're mean mug caricatures. And these guys, like, they sound awful, but there's a way of making that interesting and fun. They don't have to be God's gift.
Dude, totally. Like that's a big problem. Like a lot of like the narration that they're giving Ron Perlman is stuff that we should instead be seeing come across through conversations with these characters, because that's the fun. That's the magic of a Men on a Mission movie, right? Is watching them interplay with each other and the interactions with each other. And in fact, because they're all positioned this way as like heroic soldiers, right? They're humanity's last hope, and we're supposed to like look up to them for going on this mission. But as you just said, wouldn't it be way more interesting if at least 2 or 3 of them were just total assholes, and it was like they were constantly bickering and arguing with each other, and like and we find out they have like really bad motivations for being on this mission. Like the movie just doesn't have even the courage or like the good sense to do that, right?
Yeah, we don't even have a saboteur.
Yeah, no.
Like, come on.
They're all so interchangeable, because they're all just like, well, I'm a soldier and I'm on this mission and I gave my passes to someone I care about, right? And that's it. And it's like, well, okay, but like, then who's like that kind of like the charismatic rogue here, right? Who's like who's the dickhead, right? Who's the extra violent one? There's not that, right? It's just, instead it's like, well, that one I know is the main one because he's Thomas Jane. Like that's the only thing I can kind of wrap my head around.
Yeah, it is strange that they just don't have any distinguishing qualities, except for one of the girls like doesn't speak, you know? And
Until
of
she
course, until she does, and then she just becomes like everybody else. And then, spoilers, gets killed unceremoniously anyways, so it doesn't even matter. There's no lead up to that. There's no build up. There's no James Cameron dialogue. And I'm not trying to say that James Cameron is, replicated easily, because he's not, obviously. I mean, he's proven time and time again that there is a James Cameron style of Men on a Mission movies, right? Like Aliens, for one, is like one of the benchmarks. And this one just doesn't even fucking sniff aliens farts at this point. Like it's just like it's not even there. I will say, you texted me earlier today and you said you needed 45 minutes to talk about the next character / actor. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, cameo. So I'm gonna let you, Trev. You got 45 minutes on the clock. I'm timing you now. Listeners, buckle in.
I might have been. Here's the secret. I might have been being a little facetious about the 45 minutes, but I do need to talk about John Malkovich's performance in this, because obviously, again, this is the kind of movie you watch, and like what it said, why are Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman in this? Okay, I get it, right there, and you look at their filmographies, it's not super surprising either of them are in this, right? Especially where their filmographies go after this. John Malkovich is the kind of one where you're like, oh yeah, these movies always get like one like star who's maybe on the decline a little bit, or is like is like a pretty acclaimed star but still likes a paycheck, right? Like every Uwe Boll movie still has like Ben Kingsley will be in it for some reason or something, right? Sure. And John Malkovich is clearly that, so they can slap his face on the poster and that helps with some international sales, right? But as you said, he filmed his entire role in 2 days. He is like I guess he's like the big head honcho of the religious like order that Ron Perlman works for. And I can't remember the last time, like recently watching a movie, that I saw this uncommitted of a performance. And it's like, it's insane how clearly he's just like either reading his lines right off screen or he just learned them before they yelled action. And he's like barely like willing to like raise his head off his like off the rest of like the back of his seat to like look like he's taking this seriously. It's so uncommitted that it was another thought I had where, like I said, the thought where I was like, oh, well, this is definitely going to be the end of Thomas Jane as like an A-list potential like leading man, right? The other thought I had watching this during the John Malkovich scenes was, God, I feel bad for Ron Perlman in these scenes because he's the one sharing the screen with Malkovich, right? And I have to imagine that if you're on set with an actor like John Malkovich and he's giving that kind of performance and the director is not stepping in and saying, hey, John, can you try it with just like a 5% more energy?
Wake up.
If Simon Hunter is just like is just yelling cut and being like, great, we got it. You as an actor have to, I guarantee Ron Perlman had a moment where he's like, oh, this guy doesn't care. Like, right, this is not a real movie. Like, this is just like, this is cynical. He doesn't give a shit. He just hired Malkovich for his name. He doesn't really give two shits at all because he's not even trying to get him to ham it up. You know, we've seen John Malkovich ham it up. Think of Con Air, right? Give me that, John Malkovich. That was so depressing where it's just like, oh my God, they like flew this guy out and for like 2 days they just let him give the most like, I don't give a shit. I hate that I'm in this movie and I'm not even keeping it a secret from you on screen, you know? And like, I just have to imagine Ron Perlman is like, oh, okay, I get it, you know? And kudos to Perlman for, I suppose, being a professional and not phoning it in after that. Cause you know, he's giving a Perlman-ish performance for the rest of the movie, but that had to be like a come to Jesus moment of being like, oh no, this guy this is not a real filmmaker.
It's noticeable in those scenes together.
How much time do we have?
Days. Less, maybe.
Begin the evacuation.
Evacuation?
Move the key personnel to off-world colonies, and then we can reassess our situation.
Am I to understand that you would abandon the Earth?
Yes, brother. You understand well. We are finished here.
And even with all your ships, how many millions do you think you'll leave behind? And do you think that the enemy will stop with this world? They won't. They'll follow you. They'll follow you no matter where you run. There is still hope!
What hope?
Fulfill the Chronicles. Give me 20 soldiers and a ship.
And what can these 20 do that our armies could not?
They can go where an army cannot. They can go down into the earth. They can destroy the machine. I know what you must be thinking. You men of science, you men of commerce. But I am the man of faith. And I'm asking. I'm begging you. Have faith. Not in me, not even in this. But faith in man. Faith that the ones you would leave behind deserve a chance.
John just sleepwalking, right?
Yeah.
And Ron genuinely trying. Like, I'm not saying that Ron is giving, a Hellboy performance by any means, but there is a considerable increase in effort on his side. And especially when they do the, like a shot, reverse shot, you can see Ron almost wanting to say, John, come on, give me fucking something here.
I know.
It's palpable in the scene. So, yeah, no, John Malkovich, I mean, God bless the guy, but dude, I guess Bruce Willis was doing this for a while, but he had like kind of a reason that we've learned.
We understand that. Like,
but John
Malkovich. Speaking of Sin City, I know John Malkovich is like the star of that movie that Robert Rodriguez made that won't be released for like 100 years. You know what I'm talking about? It's like that experiment.
I do remember that. Yeah.
That movie is not going to be seen by us, or maybe even like our your. Well, I'm not planning to have children, but we like 100 years is going to come out, right?
Sure.
I bet you Malkovich gave a more committed performance than that. even.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
like, even though he knew no one would be seeing it anytime soon, because I just can't imagine. This is the worst I've ever seen him. And before I watched these scenes, I would have just said, because part of what you're just saying about Ron Perlman is that even when Ron Perlman's not, giving a Hellboy level performance, he just has this kind of natural charisma that makes him interesting to view on screen. I would have said that about John Malkovich until I watched this movie. It's like, I guess anyone's just natural charisma can be entirely sapped out of their soul if they're just like, oh God, what am I doing here?
It's funny you say even that Ron had the come to Jesus moment regarding Simon Hunter, right? Because I found this. I'm not going to place a clip here because it's too obnoxious. But I found a 10-minute interview with Simon Hunter and Ron Perlman and this super annoying host that's kind of trying to do those like that mid 2000s Attack of the Show type fly by the seat of your pants vibe, but like kind of drinking, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're drinking during the interview. We're flippant. We're not taking anything seriously.
Yeah, we're gonna swear and we're gonna be raunchy and slightly flirtatious and just kind of awkward. And it's probably one of the worst interviews I've ever seen. I needed Trev to come down the rabbit hole with me on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And hey, you made
I
me
believe
watch.
I believe I texted you. I believe I texted you. Congrats on finding the most annoying interview of all time.
Hey, you made me watch Mutant Chronicles. Okay,
that's true. I guess
we're even. But Ron in that interview just seems so. He even says it a few times, like, this isn't even a real interview. Like, even on the press tour, he's like, this wasn't a real movie. This isn't a real director. This for sure ain't a real fucking interview. Whatever, man. Like, I'm going to go cash my check, and I'm never going to talk to these people again. That's how it felt. But God bless Ron. I love Ron. Ron Perlman's great.
I love Ron too.
Love him.
And honestly, that's one thing I said, like, when the movie was done, and like Liz and I were like, "Is there anything we could say positive about this?" Like, the only thing I could kind of come up with was, I bet you that whenever they yelled "cut" and they didn't have to worry about this dumb bullshit movie anymore, I had to just be kind of a good hang, when Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman are there, and I guarantee you the cigars and the whiskey comes out. Like, I would definitely like to just sit down with those guys and hang out. Like, and I know, like, Thomas Jane, that's a tricky one, right? I believe when we did our Punisher episode, I think what I said about him is like, I don't know Thomas Jane's politics, but something tells me he leans in that. I believe I called him a do your own research kind of guy. He strikes me as like very probably like libertarian and like just based on some comments he's made in some of the movies he's made recently. But I do know in recent years he's really fallen down the believing in UFOs, and which, I mean, fine. I believe in aliens as well, and I think UFO stuff is there's clearly some truth to that. But he's heavily fallen into the oh my God, we're constantly being visited by aliens and like conspiracy theory, alien nut. And I wonder, I want to ask you, because I sent some of that stuff to you today.
And I would give anything to have a close encounter, to see a UFO that's close enough that I could see the material that it was made out of. I would be fascinated to just try to get a look at what their biology really is, if you can even call it biology, whether they're biosynthetic organisms or they're, natural born creatures from another planet or something else. I mean, I would be fascinated, but to see the skin, to see how the musculature is put together, to see what kind of frame that musculature hangs on, to just get a glimpse at that alien biology.
Do you think that maybe Mutant Chronicles was the beginning of that? Did he make this movie and go like, oh my God, this is obviously the real inside scoop here. Maybe the aliens did come and plant a machine in the ground, and it all started here.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. No. I mean, Thomas Jane, we don't like to make fun of actors, but he's kind of a kook.
He's a kook.
He doesn't believe in shoes.
No, that's the interesting thing. Whenever you watch Thomas Jane, this is the thing. You can say, like, Thomas Jane has given, like, really good performances. He's also given less good performances. He's a guy that kind of, I think he comes for, he cares what the material is, right? Mm-hmm. And if he's willing to make movies with material below him, but he'll also give the performance that deserves. Sure. And I think he's doing both in this movie. Like I said, I think there's some times he rises to, like, what the movie should be, and I think there's other times where you can tell he's a little, like, checked out as well. But what I will say about Thomas Jane is every time you see him on screen, this makes him a really impressive actor. Know that he is seething with rage that he's being forced to wear shoes. So the fact that that's not coming across on screen just proves that he is a real actor.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my God. The shoeless wonder, this man. Or Trev, he was shoeless in this whole film, and the team of 30 VFX artists had to paint in CGI shoes onto him for the entire time and added to the 1,500 VFX shots that they needed to complete in like 2 years, again, with only 30 people. This is kind of one of those... We hear about it a lot more now, but, the idea with VFX artists being overworked and underpaid and crunch and all that... This one seemed a little out of the realm of possibility from the start. I know you guys are shocked. We've already said about ambition and limited resources, but this was the most VFX shots done by a single studio in British film history. What did it have? 6 3D artists, 2 or 3 matte painters, 20 compositors. That's it. They had pre-production, took place over 8 weeks, which is nothing, especially with the magnitude of this movie. And like I said before, Simon Hunter, he's not a VFX guy. He's just a fucking guy. like, dude, he's worse than us. You know?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, like, come on here. It just felt like, man, 900 out of 1,500 shots were done in less than 6 months. This was just a complete, again, disaster. Like, I mean, I feel bad for the VFX guys and women. I feel bad for them because, Simon Carr, who is the VFX supervisor for the entire project, he's come out saying that he was at least pleased with what they achieved. I think he's just fucking shell-shocked that they even submitted a movie, like something that went to print. So good for them for at least completing it under the time crunch and the resources. But dude, this movie, it might have the award for worst muzzle flashes of all time.
Oh my God, muzzle flashes and digital blood.
Oh my God,
digital blood. And I like digital blood is like always bad, right? But this is
bad.
Oh my, this is unbelievable.
This looks, listeners, if you were to go into MS Paint, okay, and you were to draw just a red blob, okay. Mm-hmm. Now copy that, like cut it out, okay, and then paste it on frames of movies you've seen. That is what it feels like. The muzzle flashes, there's no sparks to them. It's like this weird white smoke blast. So there's like nothing that feels real. Again, there's bad muzzle flashes out there, but these have got to be the worst. And then, like you said, the CGI blood. I'm not laying the blame on the VFX artists. I really am not. No. Reading the history and reading what this company went through and the team and how they got it done and over, 2.5 years to do this, good for them. I feel your pain.
Yeah. And you do feel bad for them because like you said, like we hear these stories all the time now, but the thing is like typically when we do hear them, it's like, oh, that's really these poor like animators, they went through like crunch and like were overworked. It's like, yeah, but like, and then at the end of the day, it's like they created like Beyond the Spider-Verse or like an MCU movie where at least you can have some level of pride, right? But imagine going through all that and it's like, what'd that result in? Mutant Chronicles.
Totally.
It's like, oh my God, all that work for this. And yeah, it just, again, you said earlier how this movie proves that movies are hard. And like, it also proves, like you said, this is clearly, this is clearly a byproduct of the success of like movies like Sin City and 300. Mm-hmm. And this again shows that it takes a definite skill set and like a particular kind of eye to understand what that means to decide to do that approach, right? Like, okay, I have actors and I have green screens, but that means there's a particular kind of like understanding of framing in terms of like where to put the actor so that, the human eye can kind of like understand and take in the background behind them. Like all these things that you'd be like, well, if you're making this kind of movie, you should know how to do that, right? And you watch this movie and go like, oh no, like it feels so first draft, because I don't necessarily. It's not that like Sin City 300 thing, especially with like the benefit of hindsight and looking back on it. It's like not my favorite kind of visual aesthetic, but like it can be done well, right?
And there's a reason for it too. Like there's an artistry behind it.
I'm so glad you said that. That's another key element, right? Because with Sin City and 300, they were aiming for this like level of stylization based on trying to recreate those comic panels, right? Mm-hmm. Here you are left wondering, well, why? Why does this need to be like that other than budgetary reasons, right? Because they're not doing anything super interesting with that, like that idea of like, okay, everything is completely generated except for our actors. If it was aiming to be more stylized, if he was like a more dynamic director in terms of like where he puts the camera and everything, I might get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why another reason this movie ends up just feeling cheap is because you watch it and you go like, oh, this is just entirely budgetary. It's not stylistic.
No.
And that's like sinking the movie as well.
But it's extreme.
It is extreme. Yeah.
It's an extreme, down and dirty, independent filmmaking. Mr. Simon Hunter.
Yep.
Even though he doesn't move the camera. Anyway, I'm glad you even said that about moving the camera, because that is the issue with green screen, right? Like, it takes a deft hand to be able to move the camera and then have the artist composite the images. And it's easier if it's static shots. Anyway.
Yeah.
One last thing I'll say before we start talking about, if this deserved sequels or not.
Stay tuned, listener.
I'm bearing the lead. Leave it alone. I should have known something was up, because I think this is the first movie I've ever seen in my life that didn't have companies or studios shown before the movie starts.
I know. It just goes right in. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, there. Okay.
Which is funny because, like, I'm so used to today watching movies. What did I just? I just recently watched Flow, that like animated film about the cat, which was quite good. But again, it was like another movie that like the first like 10 minutes are just company logos. And you're like, oh my god, how many companies worked on this? And that's just become the norm, right? So then to watch a movie like this, that just throws you right in. That was jarring, actually.
Did you know there was a director's cut of this movie?
Scarier words have never been spoken.
I thought for sure, because you do the work, you know, and sometimes you do it almost like a type of self-suffering or self-harm.
Yeah.
You will watch something.
And doesn't that tell you something about this movie? Where, like I said, like knowing that, because you're right about that, and you know the kind of stuff I do put myself through. And now hearing me say that, like, I saw this back in 2008 and like was dreading watching it again, that really does say something about this. Yeah,
I had texted you saying that I learned that they're on the Blu-ray. There's like an hour and 45-minute documentary on the behind the scenes, and I thought just maybe you would seek it out, but. Again,
no, although I will say, I know sometimes we like to go to Letterboxd, and if someone has like a very funny review, the top review for this movie on Letterboxd is from a user named Sydney. They gave it 1.5 star, and their entire review is just, "I bought this Blu-ray at Dollar Tree." Nice. Yeah. And I definitely do remember the days when I would constantly see this DVD at like in the bargain bin at Dollar Trees and Big Lots. That is definitely the lasting legacy of this film. It became a bargain bin DVD and Blu-ray for sure.
It really just died in the bargain bin. It really did. There was no talk of anything to like potential scripts or, hey, maybe if we sell this to Russia, you know, like try to get co-financed in some way. There's been no talk of streaming services picking it up, the property, you know, in the age of games and video games and board games and fucking Minecraft games. Like, Warhammer has a huge following. And just, you know, this one is literally for being an IP that is seemingly stood the test of time among geekdom. Very difficult for me to find anyone rooting for this property in the film world. Cinematic
Which
world.
is funny because, you know, I said like Pressman was trying to get this going as like way back as the mid 90s, right? And at that time, and like he did some interview in like 97 or something, and he was saying like, well, the reason I got the rights to this is I see this as like a huge franchise of not just movies, right, but like a toy line and more video games, and we'll do an animated TV show, right? So when we talk about failure of franchise, this was meant to be like the new beginning of like an offshoot of this larger multimedia franchise. And it's just weird to think like how that was Pressman's like intention in the 90s. And he was still involved with this when we get to this point. But you have to feel like by the time he probably, I don't know if he visited set, by set meaning Simon Hunter's garage, I guess, or whatever, right? But if he was just like, he'd just given up, right? He's just like, I bought this name 20 years ago. I got to get something out of it.
Yeah. It was supposed to be a many verticals movie.
Yeah.
So, did it deserve a sequel?
No, no. The fact that I had to watch this movie twice is just like, again, the curse I gave myself by deciding to do this podcast. But no, I will never. I promise you, I'll never watch it again. And there's nothing about it that makes me want to see a sequel. Because, like you said, even like think about the sequel tease we get at the end, right, where we see like, oh, they defeated the machine, but the machine takes off in a spaceship and now it's flying towards Mars, right, where they've sent all the survivors. And it's like, okay, so there's your sequel tease, and I would assume they were probably thinking Thomas Jane would continue. But as you just pointed out, like maybe if you're gonna do a sequel tease, right, then Thomas Jane should have mutated, right?
Yeah.
Like it should be like, oh, now the sequel is gonna be like a crazy mutant version of Thomas Jane with like a blade arm, like taking on the bad guys. But instead, he's just kind of like he's lost some hair. It's like, oh, all right, I don't care. I don't need to see any more of this character in this world.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna echo everything you just said. This was just a total piece of shit.
Yeah.
I don't. It's very hard for me to give my coveted 0 stars out, especially on Letterboxd. I think I've given 0 stars to Spawn, and I think I gave to the movie that's not a movie. What is that? What did we watch? Maximum Ride. I think I did, but this is like teetering on a 0 star or a 1 star, just purely because I felt bad for the VFX artists. But it's like there's nothing more than that. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I there's the part of me that just likes seeing Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman, so it's like, oh, right there on screen. It's like that's my brain really trying, right? Like, oh, there's 2 actors I like, and they're not dead. They're both there. So
that's all it takes now. That's how depressed we are sometimes.
But I would say, and I think we made this point before, where we talked about because as I said, my least favorite movie we've ever done is The Love Guru,
right?
And and my point with that was like why I thought that was worse than Maximum Ride was I was like, well, Maximum Ride, it's really really bad, but it's also like, it's not a real movie. It doesn't have like this prodigious talent behind it, and this kind of falls into that where like, I'm not saying Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman are De Niro and Pacino or anything, right? But they've done better than this, and they deserve better than this. So that's what makes it like a bummer, because those are 2 guys who actually, everything on paper, right? A man on a mission movie called Mutant Chronicles about a military unit fighting monsters, starring Thomas Jane and Ron Perlman. I should love that movie. And if I don't, something has gone horribly wrong, and that does put this in the definite bottom of the barrel for anything we've covered. This is bottom 3 territory for me. Yeah,
big time. I completely agree.
Yeah.
I'm shocked we got 80 minutes out of this.
And we got to keep. If we want to be as long as the movie, we'd have to go for 30 more minutes.
Oh my god, you're so right. We do have to go longer. That's wild. Well, anyway, Mutant GENEuary was bad.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. Last episode, we looked at the New Mutants. We had a great guest on from Trev's other podcast, Days of Future Podcast, examining the X-Men. That was a lot of fun. The discussion was great. The movie was dog shit. But this one, because I thought it was a YA movie, I had maybe a slight little bit of hope. That it could be better than what we got.
I couldn't invite another friend on to co-host with this one because I couldn't do that to anyone. No. I mean, I put you through it. I can't do it to another friend.
This is like handing somebody a real version of the Ring VHS tape, and we have 7 days.
Believe me, by the end of this movie, I wish I had one of those hand grenades myself. I would.
You know what sucks? I actually have to go listen back to this episode and relive the movie again for at least a couple more hours to edit it. You bastard. You bastard. Okay, Mutant GENEuary. Bad. Done. However, we're moving in to February. And this is actually Trev's brainchild. I'll give him some credit where credit's due. So Trev, please explain the theme month that you fought desperately.
I did fight. I couldn't believe how hard I had to fight for this because we love our themes. We love like punny titles, and so when I came up with this, I was like, "This is a home run." I was like, I thought I was like, I'm going to tell Chris this, and he's going to throw a ticker tape parade in my honor. He's going to say that's the best thing you've ever thought of, and instead you're like, I don't know about that, and it took like 6 months for me to finally get you to sign off on February. And trust me, it definitely works when you see it on the page. But
Wow. That's what you want to tell people. hey, let me explain the joke.
February will be dedicated to two entries in the Jack Ryan franchise. That's right. The franchise that started with Hunt for October and continued into Clear and Present Danger and Patriot Games with Alec Baldwin and Harrison Ford. But we will be looking at 2 attempts to reboot the franchise with a younger Jack Ryan, and that is The Sum of All Fears with Ben Affleck and Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit with Chris Pine. So an odd series that 2 times in a row, they're like, let's go back to the beginning, let's reboot this, and neither time took off, and we will talk about why. But I'm excited for it because, like, honestly, coming off without even getting into thoughts on the films or anything yet, or what we our reviews, coming off of New Mutants and Mutant Chronicles, it's just like, oh, we're gonna be watching real movies again.
Yeah,
that's a nice thought
with actual movie stars and
and
directors that know how to fucking point the camera. Yeah, it's gonna be nice.
Mm-hmm.
For the record, listeners, do you guys like February or do you like GENEuary?
Oh yeah, that was part of the argument too. Is you wanted to go for GENEuary.
I was like, let's leave it for another. But you know what? I'll give credit where credit's due. If the listeners like February, they can have it. Yeah.
Well, look, GENEuary sounds more like January, and honestly, if we had done that, then you would have never seen Mutant Chronicles. So you're welcome.
Oh yeah, a different timeline. All right. Okay, that's it. Follow us at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2 FPod. That's on all the socials. Like us there. Like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Throw us a star rating. That'd be great. And just join the tribe. Hit that subscribe. And follow along to our new theme month of Jack Ryan franchise failures, I guess. Yeah, that's the name of the podcast. Mutant Chronicles has broken my brain. Okay, see y'all.
Understandable.
See y'all in February. We went hard in the paint to make fun of Simon Hunter, and I don't care about that at all. I think that was great.
No, I don't even. Oh, I didn't even realize. I'm looking at this now. Did you know that that like the chick in Mutant Chronicles that like cuts her hair off, like the one that doesn't talk? She's the princess from Hellboy 2.
I did see that she was in Hellboy 2, but I didn't know she was the princess. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anna Walton.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
the guys, the wife of his best friend that he gives the passes to, that's the main chick from The Descent.
Oh yeah.
Imagine being the star of The Descent and then being like the wife in 2 scenes in Mutant Chronicles.